Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Finca Soledad Gesha Anaerobic Wash Processed Ecuador from 43 Coffee. And there's the bag right there. And 43, based out of Da Nang, Vietnam. And this is their third ever appearance on this channel, having reviewed a couple of their coffees earlier this year. And while I did have some mixed impressions of those initial reviews, they are a coffee roaster that definitely captivated my interest, largely because of the profile that their coffees did offer. In that time, I had an opportunity to try another one of their coffees. It was a wash-processed Ethiopian from a pop-up that Airworks was hosting, and I was actually extremely impressed by that coffee. It would have been my favorite wash-processed coffee that we had reviewed this entire year, had we had an opportunity to pick up and review that coffee. So that just added to the excitement and anticipation of revisiting this coffee roaster. So it'll definitely be interesting to see how these coffees turned out, as this right here is day 67. And recipe we went with for this coffee was our standard recipe at a 16:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 96 degrees Celsius, about 205 degrees Fahrenheit. And unlike this one, best through the Chemex, which does indicate a more medium grind. Roast profile for this coffee. From our initial reviews, we stated that you can just kind of take a look at the beans and see how lightly profiled these coffees are, as they are on par with, if not lighter than, the vast majority of even some of the lightest roasted coffee roasters that we do review on this channel. They do have extremely light listed for their coffees, and that does it justice to a certain point, as they are definitely on the extremely light side of things by most standards and metrics. With all that out of the way, let's go and start discussing this coffee. Day 44, first impression. So when it comes to their coffees, I wait even past the day 40 mark to try them, because I know that it will need a pretty extended period of rest before this coffee will truly start to open up, and we opted for the V60. And it was offering plenty of similarities to some of the other Finca Soledad coffees we've reviewed in the past, including a slight savory quality that's present within the aroma, not quite translating to the cup itself, but in the grind itself and the bloom, I was noticing a slightly savory tomato-like characteristic, which was pretty abundant in one of the Tioxy Pepes that we had reviewed earlier this year, the one from Say. Listed pair did feel apt, as there's a prominent sugary sweetness to it and also a slight citric bitterness, but it's more sweet than anything else, so it was overall a pretty solid first impression of this coffee. One thing I don't particularly like about 43 is that the coffees we've had from them have all been in 100-gram bags of coffee, so this will be a little bit of a shorter review in terms of the number of days that we could work with it. But let's just go ahead and move on for right now, as on day 47 we opted for the Chemex, and it was a little bit better as it offered greater cleanliness to it with less of the savory-like characteristic. I mentioned that it wasn't quite as heavy within the cup itself, but it was still notable enough to the point where we made a note of it. That being said, to the Chemex, it was a little bit cleaner, offering a bit more of a sugary sweetness that's in line with the palm fruit-like characteristics. Slight bit of citric bitterness once again, as it feels like this coffee is slowly improving. It definitely didn't feel ready at this day 47 mark, which goes to indicate just how light these coffees are. Day 50 through the UFO brewer, and there were some mixed impressions this time, as it does have more of that savory quality to it. So it is a tomato-like characteristic, I'll just come out and say it. But in addition to that, it remains more sweet than anything else, offering a little bit brighter and more acidic of a citric quality in line with the listed orange note. Plenty of sugariness in the finish, as it essentially tastes like a slightly more intense version of the Pepe coffees that we've reviewed quite a bit on this channel, especially in terms of the sugary sense. So a lot of positive things to say about it in that regard. Savoriness, not as much. Day 53 through the V60 with 43's recipe, which is a 17:1 at 99 Celsius. I believe that they push their coffees pretty high. I could have that wrong. I'll check after this review, but it is pretty similar to our first impression, as it's presenting in a more intense and slightly less clean sense with an almost citric oil feel to it. Pretty bright and heavy with a syrupy feel and a strong sugary sense to it. So I had kind of mixed impressions. While it did help with the brightness and the intensity of the coffee, I feel like it also brought out some qualities that I wasn't quite enjoying as much as I had in the past, especially given that it seemed to be hindering the overall cleanliness of it. It is an anaerobic wash processed coffee, so there's some additional processing to it, but it played enough of a significant role to kind of take away from the cleanliness that we'd experienced up to this point. On day 57 to the Chemex with 43's recipe, and the coffee does continue to offer a prominent citric quality as it's bright yet again with some more of the syrupy qualities, as it does offer a nectar-like tropicality. Coffee is mostly clean nonetheless, with a little bit of those savory qualities still presenting as well. So as of this moment, even though 43's coffees, based off of the experiences that we've had, can be a little bit temperamental and inconsistent at times, this coffee has been on the more consistent side of things. I've just noticed amplification, if that's a word, of certain qualities based off some of the adjustments that we have made. Day 61, final notes we have through the Chemex with our standard recipe, and that's the downside of reviewing 100-gram bags of coffee, is that we run into having to end the reviews a little bit sooner. I would have liked to tinker around with this coffee a little bit more, try out a couple of other recipes, but we had to settle on the best results we'd had up to this point, which was the Chemex with our standard recipe. And it did seem to do it some justice, as it was the best it had been to this point, because it was the cleanest and best defined, with mostly a floral, jasmine, and honey-like base. So the floral base of this coffee was really prominent to the point where it was the most notable it had been up to this point. It was complemented by an abundance of sugary and citric qualities in line with both illicit pear and orange. It does have a little bit of a syrupy thickness, which is interesting for a Gesha coffee, but outside of that, the intensity is very floral blossom-like, with a cleaner stone fruit jam quality and a refined sugary sweetness. So I really like the description that we have on this last day. I feel like it was a really good representation of what this coffee actually was. And I think that's largely because day 60 going forward, based off both the coffees we're working on from them, seemed to be where the coffee was finally starting to be at the point where it was at its best defined. All right, so let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And we have quite a few level 4s. Let's go through those. We'll start with the cleanliness level 4. Even though this one's an anaerobic wash processed coffee, I feel like you could probably convince me that it's just a slightly more processed, wash processed coffee. And well, that's what it is. But even then, I wouldn't say that any of the anaerobic processing plays a significant role in the overall cleanliness for this coffee. I feel like the Gesha does a very good job of carrying its weight within this one. Very clean cup of coffee. Level 4, more than justified within this one. Finish level 4. It's not overbearing in any sense. I've also said in the past that when it comes to anaerobic wash processed coffees, they as a whole can be cleaner than your pretty much anything else that is anaerobic processed coffees. And at times they can be even notably cleaner than natural processed coffees. And that was certainly the case within this coffee. And it didn't have an overbearing or long lasting finish to it. Very even finish. And given that this one had that stone fruit jam like sense, which wasn't fermenty whatsoever for me, I really appreciated the way that this coffee did finish. Very enjoyable. Sweetness level 4, an abundance of sugary qualities. And given that this one's a Gesha, it does lead to a slightly interesting question when it comes to Pepe's coffees. Are the Mejorado coffees just all naturally that sweet, or is it pretty much the majority of Pepe's coffees? I want to say with the exception of Citra coffees, as I usually don't find them to be overly sugary sweet, but kind of noticed a lot of the same sweetness that came from this coffee with a number of the Mejorado coffees that we've had from Finca Soledad in the past as well. So it did kind of lead to an interesting question. A lot of sugary sweetness within this coffee, even if it wasn't always the most consistent. A lot of palm fruit sugary qualities to it as well. Florality level 4. I mentioned a number of floral qualities to it. Honey, that's another thing that I've gotten a lot of from so many of Pepe's coffees in the past. In addition to that floral jasmine-like characteristic to it, which I think is one of the notes that they have listed on here. I could have that wrong. I could have the coffees mixed up. It could just say generic white flowers to it. But regardless, plenty of floral qualities to this one. It did make up the base of this coffee. Citrus fruit, level 4. I mentioned on one day there's kind of a citric oil feel. I feel like if you really push this coffee a lot, then you can get a lot more of those citric qualities to it, which we did on certain days of it. But outside of that, the pear quality also aligns with that, the orange quality. I mean, the notes that they had listed on here mostly were citric notes that we would have scored that way anyway. So level 4, where we opted to put that, definitely the most abundant of the fruit qualities to this one. Couple of level 3s. We will start with the acidity level 3. I feel like that was somewhere between the 3 and the 4, not necessarily an overly bright coffee, and it was a little bit more subdued in that sense, but still prominent enough to the point where it was minimum level 3 mark, higher side of level 3 nonetheless. Stone fruit level 3. I don't think they had any stone fruit notes listed on here or anywhere in the description of this coffee whatsoever, but towards the end I was definitely getting a little bit more of a, I want to say jammy peach, and the reason I say jammy peach is because it didn't have that jammy, slightly fermenty quality that I usually associate with something like a mango or an apricot, but a little bit more of a cleaner jam-like quality to it, so I can see something like a peach, and that was really enjoyable. It added to the depth of this coffee, so level 3 is where we opted to put that. Caramel level 3, I didn't mention it too much, but there is a little bit of a kind of butterscotch-like feel to this coffee, which is something that I experience with a lot of Pepe's coffees, so I continuously wonder if maybe just the terroir has some similar qualities that do come out from these coffees. Is in a lot of ways, I can see a lot of similarities to Mejorado coffees that we've had from Pepe in the past. I mean, we've reviewed a lot of Pepe's coffees on this channel, so that was kind of interesting to me that it scored as high as it did. Last thing worth discussing, body level 3. I mentioned it does have a little bit of a thicker body to it, which does help. It has a kind of syrupy quality and characteristic to it, which gives it a little bit more depth and can be a really nice selling point to some people on this one, even with it being brewed with the Chemex. So yeah, outside of that, as I'm looking at this tasting wheel, I do think it is a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. I think it was good. I have heard that maybe some of the other coffees that came within this release were a little bit better, but I can only go based off the coffees that we are working with, and this was one of them. And I didn't quite know what to expect from this coffee. Pepe isn't the biggest fan of processing his coffees, even if it is a slightly lighter processing like the anaerobic wash processing coffee that this one is. But even then, I found it to be basically just a slightly more intense, slightly less clean of some of the coffees we've had from them in the past, which I guess just makes a lot of sense given what this coffee is. But I don't know if I have necessarily too much to take away from this. Having a limited size of coffee to work with is never necessarily advantageous to kind of coming up with a complete review, as here we are on this day 61 mark originally when we finished these notes, and I still feel like the best of this coffee is yet to come. It's just starting to peak, so for that reason this review feels a little inconclusive, but I can say on the final 2 times we brewed it, it was much more enjoyable. I think it's starting to really open up to a point where it would have been a coffee that I would have enjoyed pretty thoroughly. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to. We obviously have to start with the profile of this one being as light as it is, and a lot of patience goes into this coffee as well, but you can be rewarded. I mean, the cleanliness of this coffee is very enjoyable for the processing that it does offer, an abundance of sugariness to it, a little bit more on the citric fruit side of things, and plenty of florality to it, so it acts like a more intense, slightly less clean Gesha, which again is what you would expect from a coffee like this. All of those things, kind of the best direction I can point somebody towards on this one, and also the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I love sharing your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Finca Soledad Gesha Anaerobic Wash Processed Ecuador from 43 Coffee. Thank you for watching.